welcome back. Today we're here with Melody Mortazafi. She is an executive director of a nonprofit in India based here in Menlo Park, and we're going to talk to her today, and we're really excited.
Thank you for being on our podcast.
Yes, thank you
for having me.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do as an executive director and how that works, you being based here in Menlo Park but having to travel to India a lot and communicate with a team in India? How is that for you?
Sure. So nice to meet you guys, although I know you very well already. Nice to meet you in this context. So I just recently shifted out of the tech sector into the nonprofit world and to work for the Times of India's foundation. And what I do is basically work on the philanthropic side for a very large organization. And in India, what's super cool is that there's a certain percentage of a company's profits that have to go into the nonprofit sector by government mandate. So we take 3% of the Times of India's basically revenue and invest it, but we also work with corporate partners. So we have a lot of corporate partners that invest in bring their CSR money, they call it, to the Times Foundation for us to put it into the initiatives that we work on. We have 2 initiatives that we've built in-house, and my passion is generally around children and education. And so what we do is we have a critical thinking curriculum that we've developed to help kids in India learn more kind of a holistic approach to education as opposed to just rote learning. The schools in India are very much rote-based, so they don't do project-based learning and social emotional development and all the things that we do here in the West really well. They don't often really champion there in their schools. So we have a curriculum that we've developed with Harvard educators and educators in India that go into the schools themselves to help kids learn about critical thinking. That's one of our initiatives called Think Critically. The other initiative we have is called Think Jobs, and that's for a little bit of an older demographic. So we work with kids after high school, between the ages of 18 and 22 or 24, and we help them learn English to a level of proficiency that they can get a better job. So they go from, let's say not even a conversational level, but a rudimentary level to a highly conversational level in just 3 months. So that helps them secure really great jobs that are more higher incomes. They help with their families, helps with their community. So it really uplifts the entire community that they live in. The cool thing about that also is that because we have the leverage of the largest media company in India behind us, we're able to partner with corporates and other people in the industry to help them actually secure the jobs afterwards. So we help them not just from an education perspective, but all the way through an employment.
And just a side question, you work with kids in public schools, right?
Both, actually.
Both. Okay.
Really good question. So there's government schools in India, yes, and then which you know of, and then there's the more private schools. And the government schools are considered the private schools, and the private schools, I guess, it's the reverse, yes, the reverse of how it is here in the States. But we work with both, and our pilot programs have been in both low-income and higher-income schools, so that we can make sure that the curriculum is actually agnostic of socioeconomic background. It's really, really designed from a critical thinking on a broad spectrum rather than kind of socioeconomic standings.
Cool. And just for context, for people who aren't familiar with the Times, it's the biggest newspaper in India. It's the New York Times for here.
India. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll actually add one more thing to this because I think it's really cool what you guys are doing, and I think this will make you, this will interest you as well, is that's the nonprofit kind of part of my role. I also have a for-profit part of my role, which works with the kids newspaper in India. And Times of India has a kids paper called NIE, Newspaper and Education, and it goes to over almost 500,000 to 750,000 kids in India. And because the numbers there, we talk in such big multiples because it's such a big country. And like you said, Times is the largest English paper in India and in the world. We design a paper, my team designs a newspaper that goes every day to schools and kids from all the way up to high school. And so we're relaunching the kids paper, and February 11th is our first issue. And I'll share it with you guys. I'm super proud of it. It's taking the critical thinking curriculum, basically applying it to newspaper or news, and having an everyday touch point for kids to be able to read quality information that they know is true, is vetted, and actually really engaging and interesting. So I'm super excited about that.
Oh, we're excited to read it soon.
I'll send it to you. I'll send you our first 4 issues that we've worked on.
Excited for that. So what would you say is the most challenging part of your job, and what's most rewarding?
I think challenging, there's a few different things. One, being an American who, especially from Silicon Valley, I'm used to a certain level of organizational efficiency and speed, which just doesn't happen as readily in India. So working cross-culturally, I think, is something that is always a bit of a challenge. I think from my perspective, I get things done maybe in half a day, which in India would take, maybe 3 days. And so just organizational efficiency in general for me is something that across cultures is definitely a challenge. I'd say funding for the programs is also another challenge, because when you work in social impact work, there's so much that needs attention, and there's so much that feels like it's an emergency and that it's really dire, and there's only so much that we can do from an impact perspective. So I think resource allocation is another thing that's probably challenging for me. Most rewarding, I think I'm just a very passionate person. So whatever I take on, I become really excited by creating new products and having impact. So the fact that I get to design a paper and really think about what we deliver to kids that is free from political bend one way or another, free from any sort of free from any extrinsic motivation, but really just intrinsic motivation to give them quality information. To me, that makes me so excited. And whether that's from the paper, whether that's from the curriculum perspective, or whether it's from the English language perspective, I think that's really, I'm really lucky to work in this area.
Yeah, that's really great, especially for kids to be reading this information. I think it's very important that young adults are involved in what's going on in the world, and especially in their country, to be politically involved or just have opinions. I think is very important. Okay, so it's been great to talk to you about your current career, but we'd also love, I know you said that you used to have a career in tech, you just recently moved into the nonprofit sector, but could you walk us through your career path? What was your first job, and how did it shape your journey? And we'll just start with that.
Sure. So my career has taken a little bit of I think it was never a charted path. And I used to always say to my parents, I wish it was easy for me to just say, you know what, I'm going to be a cardiologist. I'm going to practice interventional cardiology, and I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I never had this cookie cutter, this is what I'm going to do, and I know it. I felt like I loved so many different things. I'm still so curious about so many different things that it makes kind of finding what you want to do that much more challenging. So my career actually started, I studied art history in undergrad because I loved it. And I was told my parents, I'm not going to do, I'm from an Iranian family, so very much like Indian families, it's either doctor, engineer, or lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
And outside those things, it's what are you doing with your life? So when I told them I wanted to go into art history, they were like, well, what are you going to do with an art history major? Are you going to work in a museum? Are you going to teach art history? What's your plan? And I said, you know what? I have no idea what my plan is, but I am going to learn about art history because I love it so much. And so I studied art history with a focus on pre-Hispanic utilitarian art. And from there, I had no clue what I was going to do. None. I was I just want to learn. I just want to study art history for 4 years. I want to sit in a dark room looking at slides. And I was a photographer as well on the side, so very creative. And I convinced my parents to let me do that. From there, I was recruited to work for a company that was starting in the States. I spoke French fluently. At that point, I spoke it conversationally. I wouldn't say fluently. And there was a company that was starting in the US called Sephora. And they approached me and were like, we want you to be on our founding team. So I started working with Sephora, and we launched 45 stores in our first 2 years that I was there. So that was a pretty intense ride. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it. What I loved about it was the relationship building, was the fact that it was a global company, that I worked with my counterparts in France and my counterparts in Hong Kong, and it felt very global and interesting. I didn't really quite care for the cosmetics part of it because I just wasn't interested in it, but I was interested by the scientific product, like that aspect of the skincare and things. So I found a lot of new brands that were emerging brands that the merchandising team, that I would just bring to the merchandising team, and then we would end up working with partnerships and stuff with them. So it was a great 2 years, really, really intense, very fast moving. 45 stores in 2 years is a pretty massive rollout. Sephora, while I was there, I'm gonna age myself now, but at that time, like, online shopping was starting, and Sephora, the beauty about it was the head, who at the time was an Indian man from London. His name was Shashi Batra, who passed away just a little while ago. Phenomenal merchant, really exceptional business mind, and he felt that it was very important to really think about how cosmetic industry would be able to sit within e-commerce. And that was like the last thing anyone was thinking about, because how can you buy makeup online? Like, that seemed like so far-fetched, right? Yeah, I mean, even today, like, buying makeup online still feels a little bit more difficult than buying your pantry staples and your consumer goods. So they very quickly went into the kind of the R&D phase of how do we take cosmetics and sell it online, which to this day has really helped kind of catapult them and keep them very, very economically safe, even during downturns, because they did such a stellar job investing in online retail. And so from that point, I was like, starting to kind of understand what technology would be like when it came to retail. What does technology mean from a retail angle? How do we leverage technology from a retail perspective? And this is all like Web 1.0, you guys. This is like really early days. So then from there, after 2 years, I was recruited by Gap, and they heavily recruited, and I got like sidetracked by the shiny object. And that's probably one part of my career that I regret the most. That year I was at Gap, I was extremely unhappy, and I realized that like retail was just not what I wanted to do. It didn't have the same level of professionalism as Sephora did. They had a lot of business practices that I didn't feel like I had a lot of alignment with. And one of the things that I've always held really closely to me is that I make sure I make business decisions for my career that I'm morally aligned with, that my values and my morals align with them. I'm not willing to work for companies where I don't believe that their business practices are actually what I feel value in. So that's when this whole thing blew up with Gap, that they have child labor practices in Asia, and all of these things started happening with Gap, where I was like, I just don't want to be part of this company. I can't work for a company that's going to basically work with children the way that they do. So I left and went to business school in France. And after a year and a half of being there at business school in France, I started working for Cisco, which was a total weird departure. But I worked for a very interesting department at Cisco called the Internet Business Solution Group. So what they do is they're these like super stealthy, quiet part of Cisco that goes to major retailers and basically says, hey, let us help you apply internet technologies to your retail operations that will help you either streamline your inventory management or help you basically somehow increase revenue in a certain way, optimize efficiency, whatever it is. But we're going to help you because we have this really stealthy, cool ninja team of consultants that are going to help you with that, because they know internet technology. And this still is at a time where retail was trying to apply certain things. And so I got into learning a lot about RFID, which at the time was brand new, radio frequency ID tags. And they were putting them into to like the most expensive SKUs. So for example, like shaving kits, you know how the actual attachment that goes into it, those are super expensive, right? Like the razor blades.
Yeah.
The razor blades are super expensive. So it behooves retailers to be able to track the inventory on those razors more efficiently, because if they lose them, the cost to their it's a heavier cost. So I worked with like really cool companies like Marks and Spencer, Ahold, really big box European retailers on how to use RFID to help their inventory management. And I was kind of a supply chain geek when I was in business school. I love supply chain because it's all about efficiency. So I was working with retail, but helping them, going back to my Sephora days, helping them use different internet technologies to improve either inventory management or sales funnels and things like that, which was super cool. From there, this was in Paris. I was living in Paris doing this, and I was traveling a ton. Like I was traveling 4 or 5 days a week, like every day on a plane to some city. And half the time, like you spend more time in the car going to the airport in Paris because the traffic is so bad than the actual flight itself. So I was traveling a lot. I met my ex-husband, and I knew I would always move back to the States. So we moved back to the States, and Cisco offered me a job, but their IBSG team here was definitely not as cool and sexy as the one in France. And I was like, I don't want to work for Cisco in Silicon Valley. That sounds like such a big bore. What do I want to do? And so I actually interviewed with 2 places. I interviewed with Apple, and because I really wanted to work for Apple at that time. And I also interviewed with a company called Landor. And Landor is a really cool brand consultancy firm. And so they consult big retailers on building their brands. And that's kind of what I had done, earlier in my career, and to some extent, but I always loved the creative angle of brand strategy. And Apple was taking forever. And this is at the time, you guys, where Apple Retail had just launched. And so I interviewed with the head of Apple Retail, and his office was next door to Steve Jobs' office. And so I go into the interview, and Steve Jobs is like in the office next door to me, like shouting and doing things, and I'm like so nervous. But I had like 8 or 9 interviews with them, and they were taking a long time, and I was getting restless. So I took the job with Landor, and I was there after like 4 months. Apple called me, and they were like, we want to bring you back in for a last round. We're looking for this. And I was like, I'm sorry, I already took another job, and I had signed a contract, so I had to let Apple go. And I stayed at Landor. And I was there for about 1.5 years, and then I got pregnant with my daughter, with Noor. And from there, I was and I was still consulting at Landor, so I was traveling a lot for work, and my clients were in Colorado, and I didn't want to travel anymore. And I was like, I can't get on a plane and leave. My ex-husband at the time was a resident at Stanford in cardiology. He was never there. And I couldn't basically, we needed one parent on the ground. So I stopped working at Landor. And when I was pregnant with Milo, I was like, I just had a business idea that I thought would be really great in this area to do. So I found 2 partners whom I'm still super close with, and we started the first kids indoor education play facility in Menlo Park called Yumi. And it was designed to nurture the child through creativity and play. It was like 15,000 square feet. I think at our peak we had over 1,000 members, and it was really quite a special place. And we had that for like 9 years. And so I managed it and ran it, and my kids grew up there, and I was able to, sustain kind of the intellectual stimulation and the business stimulation that I needed, while also being present for my children, and being really kind of there for them. And I mean, to this day, I think part of the reason why my kids are they're pretty well adjusted and social is because they lived at Yumi. They felt ownership there. They managed the play space. They taught classes. Noor taught art classes. Milo would be on the tumble ground. They were really part of the environment. So as you can see, my career has taken this very kind of serpentine formation. There was no clear path. I really followed my heart and my instinct a lot. I wasn't willing to sacrifice my values and principles to work for somebody that didn't align with them. And I always chased my curiosity, I think, more than anything. Even still, making a change into the nonprofit world in your 40s it's a brave step, going out of the tech sector. I didn't even talk about what I did after UMI, but there's been like several tech jobs after that I've done, and mainly as head of product. But I've always followed, I think, my heart when it comes to these things.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and it's so impressive to hear you talk about everything that you've done in your career so far, and especially like with Sephora. When you first said that, I was like shocked. I was like, wow, like everybody goes to Sephora. I had no idea that you were part of like the beginnings of Sephora. That's really cool, and then from there it just got even more impressive. And I think that because you started working with Sephora right after like going to college for art history, it really shows that you can study, like you can do whatever you want, and there's so much you can do with what you study, and then there's so many more opportunities.
It's true though. It's actually, I think, when I think about what we're doing now and teaching critical thinking and teaching kids how to, apply their minds in a kind of in a wider way, like casting a wider net, being like good at interpersonal skills, being, having a growth mindset, like all the things that you guys really learn about, I think really help to land that first job if it's outside of the scope of what you learn. And even if it's not outside of the scope, and let's say you know exactly what your path is, and you study engineering or CS and you want to go into coding and you know what your path is, those are all skills that just make you a better employee, make you a better person, make you someone who can actually add a lot of value, right? And that's kind of how I feel. And that's why I tell my kids, like, it doesn't really matter what you study undergrad, like do what you love.
Yeah.
And from there, I'm sure everything else will fall into place.
Could you tell us about your, like, where you grew up and where you went to high school and college and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Hillsborough, just up the road. I went to high school at Aragon. I was a athlete. I think part of the reason why I have this, like, I don't know, I think my kids would say it's annoying, but I think I have a really good discipline. I wake up every morning at 4:00. I exercise every day. I'm super vigilant about like my schedule, although I'm like flexible when it comes to whatever happens last minute. But I think because I was always an athlete, right? And you being an ice skater and you playing tennis will know that like when you are a serious athlete at a young age, it kind of builds this discipline in you that you carry forward through the rest of your life, right? I woke up every day in my teens and early 20s at 5 a.m. to jump in freezing cold water and swim. It's helped carry me through my career. So I went to Aragon, and from there, so I'm first generation here. My parents grew up, I was actually born in Iran, but I moved here when I was 4. And my parents were very new. My mom was very new to this country. She was also very young. My mother was 17 when she had me. And she moved to a new country, not knowing anything about this country, not even speaking English when she moved here. And so she always had this level of fear around letting her firstborn, especially being a girl, do things that made her feel uncomfortable. So out of high school, I got into a bunch of schools on the East Coast. I was like determined to get as far away from home as possible. Like all I cared about was, I don't care what the school is, I just want to be as far from home as possible because I wanted independence and I wanted to be able to, pave my own way. And I felt extremely stifled being the only daughter of immigrants who didn't understand this country and felt afraid at every turn. So for me, college was a way to escape that. They had no intention of letting me go away after I graduated high school. I got into a bunch of schools on the East Coast, of which like some of them were phenomenal schools. And they said, nope, you're going to stay here and you're going to go to junior college for 2 years, because I also graduated when I was really young. I was 17 when I graduated. So I stayed here. I went to Foothill College for 2 years. And then I was going to go to Boulder, I think at that point, to CU Boulder. And again, went there. My parents were not okay with a lot of the things. I wasn't actually okay with a lot of the things. So I was like, what do? I just want to work. I don't want to be in school. I just want to get done with college. And so I came back. I went to San Francisco State and I finished in a year and a half. Like I took so many classes every semester, and in a year and a half I finished, and I graduated college when I was 21 pretty much.
Wow.
So then I started working right away.
That takes a lot of dedication, and I think what you said about being an athlete, like to help you drive you through that, is definitely significant. I really admire like student athletes who have that drive, and I think it's very important.
And also it helps you deal with failure, right? Like we
Yeah.
were talking about today.
Yeah.
When you don't come in that third or fourth or whatever position and you've missed it by just a hair, it helps you figure out, what do you do post that? How do you
Yeah.
pick yourself up, dust yourself off? How do you keep going after you've had a seemingly failure to other people's eyes, or you didn't do as well as you wanted to do? How do you deal with that? And I think athletics is one of the ways that really helps kids understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think how you were saying like you didn't get to go to the East Coast and you stayed here. I think a lot of people have this like misconception that they have to go to like the best school possible to have the best career and to make the most money or whatever. But I think it just kind of shows like you can be success. Like college does not define your success at all. And frankly, it doesn't even like, you can do whatever you want after because you studied art, and then you're able to switch it to Sephora and do all these great things. So I think that's also something really impressive.
Especially now, I think for kids, it's so competitive to get into colleges, and I don't think that they really do understand that, your success in the future in your life is not dependent on necessarily what school you go to. It's there's so much more than that. And unfortunately, we often, the people that we hear about, and if we hear more often than not where they went for their education, where there's just as many of those people who are highly successful, that their education hasn't played such a vital role in their success, whether it's financial or otherwise, and we don't hear about it as much. And I think that there's a huge there's a huge shift that has to happen in the society to be able to understand that, to help kids understand that, because it's a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yeah.
And these schools are just, honestly, they're just big brands. That's all they are.
Yeah, that's true. I think we've talked to you so much about your career, and it's been so great. Truly, some really great advice in there. But if you had to give one piece of advice, just to like high schoolers at our high school or high schools in the area, who are kind of like feeling lost about what they want to study and are really nervous about college, like us, and what piece of advice would you give them?
I mean, what I tell Milo, basically my son, is that curiosity and passion make up for everything else. So if you can stay curious about things, even if it's like your lamest class that you hate, be curious about it, dig into it, try to figure out like more about it. Just stay curious, stay hungry and passionate. I think that is the most important thing. And that'll carry you through college apps. It'll carry you through everything.